They receive 2 or 3 visits from a loan officer. You know, some programs work harder than others to deal with that, but transaction costs can be actually pretty significant. As you look forward to the future of financial services, it seems like we not only have to worry about the institutional costs, but how do you get services into the community where people live every day? Very short example of that. I worked with the Jamaican postal savings banks at one point. We were putting in sort of an informally based formal credit and formal savings product based on sort of the ROSCA system they have called Partners in Jamaica. One of the most, it all went fairly well, and got the products out there through the post offices. But one of the really interesting things we found, which speaks to this point, is that because we capped the size of each transaction so that we wouldn't change the security profile at the post office and require them to have armed guards and things like that they just didn't have, because those post offices were selling stamps and stuff like that. You didn't want to put thousands of dollars into them, so we capped, right, the transactions, which served 2 purposes. It meant we only really were serving pretty poor people, and second, it kept the security profile reasonable. One of the unexpected consequences was we discovered a year later that the payments were being made by the children of the micro-entrepreneurs on their way to school, because the post office was across, typically, in those little plazas across from the school. So actually, all of a sudden, transaction costs go to virtually 0, because the entrepreneur themselves not making the payment, the kids making the payment on the way to school, and all of a sudden, some pretty profound things start to change in people's behavior. Very interesting sort of observation. I think we can never underestimate the importance of transaction costs to people. Sometimes we're not respectful enough of people and their time, no matter how little that time seems to be worth in any sort of international currency. So here's sort of a layout of the areas that we work in. On the left-hand side, you can see these sort of things that go vertically: business model, product offering, increased capital flows, and public policy. This was the original set of strategic areas that were laid out when the group was founded, and that's going to get sort of updated in March. But in any case, you can see in the top here, business model is one of the things that I say the foundation is most interested in addressing. What I put up here are sort of the key structural elements to the current biz model from a cost perspective. If we said that cost is the key driver of maybe change in microfinance and our ability to accomplish many of our goals, what would be sort of the key structures or pieces of cost that one might want to address? And that's sort of what we have put up here. You kind of see it's divided into the client front end, transaction management, and infrastructure. And this is basically divided into your client interface, the cash management, and then the infrastructure that houses you. And it seems like if you want to dramatically improve costs in the business, then you have to make structural changes in at least some of these areas. And this is a hard one, because every time I've talked about, lowering costs, I don't know if I don't explain it right, but people think I'm trying to get them to work harder. And they get really pissed off at me. We're working hard enough. And no matter how I try and explain the notion of productivity or doing things differently, it doesn't sink in. What we're talking about is you really need to figure out what's an entirely different way of doing something where the cost is dramatically different. So let me give you a real quick example. In the bank in northeast of Brazil that I was working with for a while, a development bank, had 175 branches. People were paying in the branches. Average cost of each payment in one of those development bank branches was $2 a payment. That's what it cost every time a client stood in the teller window. Okay? Now, your average for commercial banks across the globe is about $1 a transaction. So we went out and we negotiated with the post offices that had 1,700 outlets, so 10 times the number of outlets as a development bank. And their cost at the teller window, because they just had, had cashiers doing stamps. They didn't have the same kind of big puffed up tellers you see in development banks, right? Their cost was 25 cents on a dollar.